So, Assalamu alaikum viewers, welcome to this session of our Islam Study Circle, and you must be seeing the screen right before you. So, as is our custom, we shall discuss a Quranic verse or short Quranic verses, and then a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then a passage from the Bible, and then we'll go on to the next section. The next segment, which generally deals with some common misconception. So, starting off now with this verse of the Quran. Actually, this verse is in fact a short surah of the Quran, and I think it is one of the very common surahs of the Quran, and most of us have actually learned it by heart. We teach it to our children, and also we know that this verse is often read by our imams and prayer leaders in our mosques, in our congregational prayers. So this should not be anything that you don't know. So I'm just going to read out the text of the verse before you, and then its translation also. So it says, "Wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr." So a translation of this surah would be, "Time bears witness that these people shall definitely be in a state of loss, except those who accepted faith, did righteous deeds, urged one another to the truth, and urged one another to remain steadfast on the truth." So as you can see, the title of these verses, or this surah of the Quran which I have chosen, is Permanent Requirements of Faith, because excuse me, this surah actually spells out these permanent requirements of faith. But before we discuss those requirements, I'll just take a moment to review some of the sentence construction and the way these words occur in this sequence. So first of all, the very first verse, which is "Wal asr," it has been translated as "time bears witness." And when I say time bears witness, it actually refers to the time of prophethood from Adam to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This was the time in which lesser days of judgment were set about on this earth, so that people who intentionally denied the truth brought to them by their messengers of God were punished in this world, and those who accepted the truth, they were actually rewarded in this world. And this whole rehearsal was done so that it could become a complete substantiation of the reward and judgment that is going to take place in the hereafter. So, in other words, what is being implied is that these lesser days of judgment, which were brought about on this earth in the times of the messengers of God, they signal that mankind is in a state of loss, which the word mankind actually is not a very appropriate translation, I would say. The more accurate translation would be that these people, and here the reference is to the people who were the adversaries of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they are being told that the time before him, which has passed, tells us that people who have intentionally denied a prophet of God, a messenger of God, have been punished. So that particular era, which preceded the prophet from Adam right up to him, that particular era bears witness to the fact that these people, or the people which are in front of the prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam standing there, they shall be in a state of loss, which means they shall be doomed, except the people who have professed faith, except the people who have done righteous deeds, except those who have urged one another to remain steadfast on the truth, to the truth, and except those who have urged one another to remain steadfast on the truth. So, as I said, that the vow in the Quran often signifies an oath also, and this oath is not always sworn for the sake of emphasizing a statement, as in the case with our own language in English and Urdu. And of course in Arabic also there is a style when we swear something, we intend to emphasize a statement. So swearing by something means you want to emphasize something. In Arabic language, especially in the Quran, also in ancient Arabic literature, classical Arabic literature, we find that the wa is also means to bear witness. So the word wa is not just meant for emphasis, it also refers to bearing witness of something. So whatever is borne witness to is then stated after this premise, or this oath itself. So innal insana lafi khusr is the premise on which the word asr is actually signifying. So in other words, what is being said is that the period of prophethood, right from Adam to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is bearing witness because of the fact that during this period people were punished for their intentional denial and they were rewarded for their acceptance of the truth. A similar fate awaits these people who are standing before the Prophet if they do not accept faith. And if they do so, then it's not just acceptance of faith. What they'll have to do is they'll have to do good deeds, amilus salihat, and then their responsibility would be to urge one another to what the truth is, what righteousness is, and then urge one another to remain steadfast on the truth. So in other words, these are the conditions which will save them from that punishment. And this, in other words, will mean that these conditions are the permanent requirements of faith. They are the essential requirements of faith, and anyone who does not subscribe to these conditions, who does not follow these conditions, who does not actually implement these conditions in his life, he is really doomed. And hence, this is something which is of fundamental importance. Now, let us view the things that have been spelled out here. First of all, it has been said, amanu. Amanu means to believe. And of course, when we say belief, it refers to some articles of faith. For example, belief in God, belief in the angels, belief in the hereafter, belief in the books of God. So these are the basic beliefs that we have been asked to profess faith in. And when we say the belief in the books of God, it of course means to attest to all books of God. It's not just the Quran that Muslims are required to believe in. It's just not the Prophet of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that they are required to believe in. But on the other hand, they have to believe the previous scriptures, other books, divine books as well. And they have also to profess faith in other messengers of God as well. And then it is said, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, they have to do righteous deeds, they have to do good deeds. And the word عَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, as you must have noted, occurs numerous times in the Quran. And it actually refers to all good deeds which are held to be good by human nature as well as by the Sharia. So it encompasses morality, it encompasses ethics, it encompasses various precepts of the Sharia, and therefore it is important that people who subscribe to be believers, they have to do these righteous deeds. They must not think that faith is just a thing of believing. It's not just the fact that you have to make yourself known as a Muslim, but you have to show something through your practical deeds so as to testify the fact that your faith actually bears witness and signifies to certain practical realities. And amongst those practical realities, of course, the very important one is the fact that you have to be a morally upright person, a person who is always careful and always sensitive to what he is doing. And the person who is sensitive to about his own life is the person who actually worries more of what he is doing. He worries less of what others are doing. We people generally have a habit of criticizing other people, and this actually makes us lose track of the fact that we ourselves need our critique the most. So if we have to criticize anyone, let it be our own selves. We have to give this undertaking that anyone else, maybe whatever he is or she is, because he or she is answerable to God for his or her deeds. But as far as I am concerned, I am going to first of all criticize my own self. I must hold myself accountable. So self-accountability is the real manner in which we have to start becoming a good person. I have pointed this out several times that good deeds are something which we do not want to have any feedback from any external agency, because our own conscience is sufficient to tell us what good and bad is. And then the other thing is that in order to do good deeds and avoid bad deeds, it's our own self-motivation. And this only occurs through self-accountability, through self-assessment, through self-evaluation. Instead of seeing what other people are doing, we have to see what we are doing. And then, of course, there are other things besides morality, which of course include various precepts of Sharia as well. And as we shall go along, we will discuss some of these in the next lessons, in the next sessions as well. But primarily, what needs to be understood is that professing faith does not merely mean that you believe in God or the angels or the last day or the books and the prophets of God. It's not just a matter of believing. No, that's the first step. The second step is to actually show your belief through good deeds. So unless you are able to show yourself, show your good self through your good deeds, your faith is not sufficient. And then, my dear viewers, one aspect or two aspects of these good deeds have actually been highlighted. And the most important thing that has been highlighted here is that believers are those who urge one another to what righteousness is, to what the truth is. So this is a right, this is an obligation that we owe to others. What we consider to be the truth, we must become its proponents. We must become its advocates. We have to adhere to the truth and we have to transfer the truth. It's like a legacy that we transfer to others. It's like a belief that we think has to be shared with others. So the most important amilus salihat, or the most important deed among these deeds is that we have to urge other people, we have to advise them, we have to counsel them, we have to try to convince them that they must adhere to the truth. And we have to also take into account the fact that the Arabic words are tawasaw, which means that this urging has to be mutual. So there's no a single person who stands on a higher pedestal and he thinks that he knows everything and he is actually advising other people to adopt the truth. No, that's not the case here. The basic precepts of the truth are known to everyone. Hence, this counsel, this advice has to be mutual between two people of who are friends, who are colleagues, who are associates, who are members of the same family. So tawasaw bil haq means that in your own surroundings, people should carry out this duty, and they should not wait for some other scholar to sort of tell them what the right and wrong is. Whatever right and wrong they think should be communicated to someone that you know has to be done in a way in which we do so in a mutual way. And then the other thing, which is even more important, is that you have to urge one another to remain steadfast on the truth. Because you see, whenever you start following the truth, whenever you start obeying the truth, whenever you want to adopt the truth, trials come your way. You are tried, you are tested, and at times these trials and tests, they come in clusters, they come to stay, and they really jolt and shake a person. So it's not just advising and counseling other people to adopt the truth. It is about telling them that if you adopt the truth, you will be tried and tested. You would be shaken and jolted. So once you adopt the truth, you remain steadfast on the truth. And for this, of course, although these Quranic verses do not refer to the fact, but as we have often discussed vis-a-vis parallel verses of the Quran, that the most important thing which gives us this steadfastness, as the Quran says, وَمَا صَبْرُكَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ, that the greatest thing that gives you this patience, this steadfastness, is your relationship with the Almighty. The stronger this relationship, the more steadfast you will be in adopting the truth, in persevering on the truth, in actually advising other people to adopt the truth, and also sticking and adhering to the truth yourself as well. So this is, in a nutshell, is basically what these verses of the Quran say. And I would say that this is a very, very pungent and a very, very powerful message which is given by these verses. And it's in the fitness of things that besides reciting these verses in our prayer, we must also have a fair idea of what actually these verses talk about. And hence they, as we have just discussed, they speak about the permanent requirements of faith, and they also advise us that merely believing in certain realities is not enough. You have to be men of action. You have to be people who actually follow a certain conduct in life. You are people who have a certain character in life. Only then your faith has any significance before the Almighty. Now let's move on to the next part of our session, and this, of course, as you always know, is a hadith of the Prophet, and you can see that the hadith is being displayed before you. This hadith is actually a hadith from the Sahih of Imam Muslim, and it actually has been narrated by one of his companions, and his name is Jarir. So the words are, An Jarir an Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam قال من يحرم الرفق يحرم الخير. So man yuhram al-rifq yuhram al-khair. Jarir reported that the Prophet said, he who is devoid of gentleness is in fact devoid of goodness. So you can clearly see how heavily stressed is this fact that a believer, that one of the qualities of a believer is that he has to be a gentle person. He has to be a person who is soft, a person who is sincere, a person who is not harsh, not only from his words but also from his conduct. So this gentleness has to be apparent from our deeds, from our words, from our conduct, from the way we conduct ourselves before people. You see, the Prophet has been very strict here when he says that a person who is devoid of gentleness actually is devoid of goodness. In other words, if a person is not gentle, he's not soft, he's very harsh, he's very rude, he is something of a person who has lost this goodness in himself. So the Prophet is trying to urge us to be gentle, to be soft, to be caring of other people. And of course, when we say you have to be soft, it means that your softness has to first of all manifest itself from the words that you speak. You have to be sweet, you have to be gentle. Your words must be music to the ears. Your words must be gentle. Your words must urge others. Your words must be as if they are really welcomed by the other person, because only when you are a well-wisher of the other person, only when you speak in a soft tone, only when you speak in the right time, at the right moment, at the opportune moment, only then whatever you say has an impact on the person that you intend to make an impact on. So the second important thing here is that not only your words have to be very, very correctly chosen, but also the manner in which you conduct yourself, the way you would enter a room, the way you would start a conversation, the way you would dress up, the way you would look at people. This should reflect gentleness. It should reflect softness. It should reflect a welcoming behavior. It's like smiling at other people instead of being disturbed on our heart. Maybe we are very worried in our own hearts. Maybe we are very anxious, but outwardly we smile. Outwardly we look at people and we welcome them. We make them feel comfortable. This gentleness actually, my dear viewers, is something which becomes even more pronounced when we are looking at people who are less off, or they are in some bother, in some difficulty than us. In that case, showing this gentleness, showing this softness is all the more reason. People who are deprived in this world, people who are younger to you maybe, people like for example who have to be cared and given this special care. When you pick up a child, when you kiss a child, when you walk about with a child, when you joke with him, when you make good jokes at him, of course not making fun of him, you are actually welcoming that child. You are actually giving this impression to that child that you would like to be friends with that. So you would know that in Arabic, a person who is called a friend is called Rafiq. And the word Rafiq has actually sprung from this word Rifq. Rifq means gentleness, softness. So a person who is a Rafiq is a person who is bound to be gentle to his friend. So you can clearly see the connection that Rafiq is a person who is gentle, who is soft, who is caring to his brethren or her brethren. And I think that these words have such a powerful message to convey to us that I don't think it needs any further explanation, except for the fact that let us review our lives. Are we gentle to our brethren, or are we coarse and harsh to the people around us? Do we speak in a stern way? Are we always scolding people? Are we always calling them to account? Are we always point scoring? So let us review when we go to bed today, or whenever we have this waking time, that let us review our mannerism. Let us review whether we show this gentleness to other people or not, because if we don't, then we have to do some serious soul searching, and it does mean that there's something really missing in our lives, and we are in fact not pleasing the Almighty at all when we have a conduct which is contrary to what this hadith has actually said. Viewers, now let's move on to the third part of our first segment, and this is a Bible verse that I'm going to read out before you. It is the fourth verse of the fourth chapter of the Gospel according to Saint Matthew, and the title that I have given it is Spiritual Existence. So it says, "It is in the writings, bread is not man's only need, but every word which comes out of the mouth of God." Now, this is a beautiful rendering of the fact that it's not just the physical sustenance that we need. Mankind, or man himself, or human beings are made of two components. They have this physical component for which they need bread, for which they need food, for which they need fodder, so that they can actually exercise this strength in them and become sturdy individuals. The verse actually points out that it's not just bread which is needed for a person, but the fact that you also need this spirituality, which means the word which comes out of the mouth of God actually refers to the wahi, or the divine revelation. This divine revelation also is something which helps us, especially our spirit, our soul. The soul that is within us needs fodder. It needs to grow. It needs to sustain itself. And the best sustenance that it can gather for itself, for it to really maintain itself, is the Word of God. So in other words, Jesus is talking about here is that it's not just your own physical body that you should be worried about, because that is what we are generally worried about. Other than that, we have to be worried about our own spiritual existence, the soul found in us. We have to be equally worried about that, and for that, the fodder of the soul is divine revelation. So just as our physical being needs food, our spiritual being needs revelation, needs the Word of God, which in other words, of course, when we talk about today, are the divine books, especially the Quran itself, which has been the preserved and the final book of God. So if we have to savor the taste buds of our spirit, of our soul, then we have to feed our soul with the words of the Quran. So it is the words of the Quran which are going to be helpful in nourishing our soul. The soul needs the nourishment of the Quran, and the more you provide it, the more strong your soul will be. And you know what? A strength of a soul is directly proportional to how we behave when we are faced with a choice regarding good and evil. If we have a strong soul, if we have a soul that has been nourished by the Quran and by the Almighty's remembrance, we'll stand a very high chance in evading evil and adopting good, in forsaking evil and adhering to what righteousness is. So this is a measure of how strong our soul is. Viewers, this brings us to the end of our first segment, and if there are any questions regarding this first segment, I'll be very happy to answer them. After that, we'll go on to the next segment of our study circle.
We have a question from Sadaf. Please unmute your mic and go ahead.
Yes, Assalamualaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
We can hear you, but Dr. Shehzad, we can't hear you.
Okay, I can hear you now.
We can hear you now.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you the soul searching that, once we get to the point that, okay, we really need to work hard on our manners and the way we treat some people different than others, and or when we realize that we have been doing it, that guilt sometimes, a lot of times, it prevents you from progressing.
Mm-hmm.
That this, especially sometimes with let's say with kids, now they're older, and
Mm-hmm.
you realize that you could have been much softer than you have been with them. So, and you see that the way you have raised them, or you see your mistakes, the behavior in them. How do you get past that and try to correct yourself? Because now you see the reminders in them, that we messed up.
So you're absolutely right here that that is a cause of tremendous embarrassment and regret for us parents whenever we see that since we have not conducted ourselves the way we should have as parents, and we see our follies being reflected in our children, and I'm afraid not much can be done except for the fact that we must transfer this legacy to our children, that they should not repeat this behavior which they actually bore from their own parents. So I think that we should transfer this feeling to the next generation, And also, I think there is no harm in apologizing. We, of course, at times we have to apologize for our past mistakes. So if we see that our children are not up to the mark in certain areas, especially in their moral conduct, and we also think that we were lacking in our own guidance at the time when they were growing up, I think this is something which we need to express before them whenever there is an opportune time, because this is a very subtle thing and it might not be understood by them or might not be perceived by them in the correct way. So we might have to wait for the right time. But I think there's no harm in apologizing that we ourselves were not up to the mark, and therefore if there's something that you're not doing up to the mark, it has much to do with what the parents actually, the way they behaved. And the second thing, as I said, that can be done is that they must be told that this is what the right thing is. And maybe a third thing that can be added here is that if you get a chance to deal with your grandchildren, because there is this always, this is what we call a parental lapse, which is always made up by grandparents, because parents often make these mistakes with their own children. But if they learn the mistakes that they have made with their own children, then perhaps if they get a chance to bring up their grandchildren, they should try to make this up as far as possible. Other than that, as I said, it's more or less a lost cause, because things that have been done cannot be reverted. Only a lesson can be learned from them. And I think apologizing and then making up as far as possible, and maybe if you get the chance with your younger generation, with your next generation or the third generation, which are your grandchildren, if you can do with your grandchildren what you did not do with your own children, that could perhaps be some form of compensation, although it's not a complete compensation.
Sure. Thank you.
So we have no more questions,
Okay.
so we can move on to the next one.
Okay, the next segment, as you all know, generally deals with a common misconception regarding Islam and some of the notions that we believe go under the label of Islam. And since the Eid al-Adha is drawing near, very near in fact, so I have to make a small clarification regarding Eid al-Adha, and this is a common misconception which, let me also tell you, at times has become so great, it has become such a pinching thing in the minds of so many people that it has led them towards abandoning religion, towards atheism. And that question is that why? Let me be the devil's advocate and pose this question in a way that people would pose it if they are given this chance to express their inner feelings. And the way I have heard this question and the way I think I can phrase it is that why was the Almighty so cruel as to ask for the sacrifice of a human being who was the son of a very celebrated prophet that he sent, Abraham, of course? And what made God so cruel as to ask for the sacrifice of a child who was born after Abraham had turned 86? According to the Old Testament, he was 86 years old when his firstborn son Ishmael came into this world. And why did the Almighty at all ask for this sacrifice? Because after all, human sacrifice is something which we all detest, and of course we just cannot even think of sacrificing or even slaughtering our children. So why is it that the Almighty became so cruel? This is how this question is addressed, I would say, in a more friendly way. I've seen harsher versions, but I have seen this question actually at the base of many people's disgruntled behavior regarding religion. Because you see, as far as this question is concerned, there is no difference between religion as far as divine religions are concerned. For example, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, all these religions, which are the Abrahamic religions, believe in this great sacrifice. The only difference is that according to the Old Testament, the son which was meant to be sacrificed was Isaac, and according to the Quran, the son that was meant to be sacrificed was Ishmael. So as far as this discrepancy is concerned, this of course could be resolved in some other session, but the discussion that I'd like to point out here is that how should we address this question, that when someone asks us that why did the Almighty ask for this sacrifice or human sacrifice, something which we all have our hairs stand on end when we even think of a knife being taken out, and then we think of a son which has been born after so many years and after so many supplications and prayers, and he is actually prostrated before God, because as we know, the way Abraham has sacrificed or intended to sacrifice Ishmael, the way it appears in the Quran is falamma aslama wa tallahu lil jabin, that actually he was made to prostrate before the Almighty, and it was in this situation that the knife was intended to slaughter him. Now, to understand this question, we have to once again look at the Quranic verses which actually describe this incident or this event of sacrifice. Surah Safat is the verse, is the surah where this incident is described. This is the only place in the Quran where this incident has been described in detail. It has actually been given a whole background, and it is here that the key to this question lies, in one of the verses in which the Almighty has actually delineated the way Abraham actually took to this enormous task, this task that even today brings us shudders when we think that he had gone out, he had taken his son all the way to a place so as to slaughter him. Now, it seems from the Quran, first of all, that the incident of sacrifice, or the directive of sacrifice, if I may correct myself, was actually given to Abraham not in words or not through some divine revelation, the way revelations are sent, but he was shown this in a dream. So, inni arafil manami anni azbahuka. So the proper translation or the accurate translation of these words, if that is kept into account, it means that he was repeatedly shown this dream in which he was actually sacrificing his son. So it was not that he was being ordered to sacrifice his son through words by the Almighty. He was actually being shown a dream. So now, dreams of the Prophet of God, we have to understand, they are a means of education, they are means of instruction, they are a means of revelation, of course, but mostly these words, they are engulfed, they are enveloped in a certain symbolic way. They actually portray a situation in a symbolic way. This is much like the dream of the Prophet Joseph, which has been mentioned in the Quran. We read Surah Yusuf, and we can see that it says that Joseph dreamt that 11 stars and the sun and moon were prostrating before him. Of course, when he saw this, it needed interpretation. And when at the end of the surah we come to know that all his 11 brothers who had actually forsaken him and had tried to kill him, they actually came back to him and they professed and they confessed that they did something wrong, and they accepted him, and also his father and mother were able to come to him in Egypt when he was there. So this is how the dream got fulfilled, and the Quran says that this is the interpretation of your dream. So the point that I'm trying to make is that, first of all, that dreams of the Prophet of God, they must be interpreted. They must not be taken symbolically. I mean, the way they occur here. So there are dreams which are per se, which are interpreted the way they are shown, but most of the dreams, they are enveloped in a certain symbolic sequence, and we have to understand that symbolic sequence. Now, if we study the Torah, if we study the ancient scriptures, sacrificing something, when we see that in a dream, it actually means dedicating that thing or devoting that thing for some cause. And here it clearly tells us that when Abraham had actually built the Holy Kaaba, and it was then that he was shown this dream, the purpose of the Almighty was that he intended Abraham to devote and dedicate his son Ishmael for the maintenance and custodianship of the house of God. So once a house of God is constructed, someone needs to be its caretaker, someone needs to be its maintainer, someone needs to look after it. So what the Almighty was actually telling Abraham was that when this house will be constructed, you have to dedicate your son for this cause of the custodianship, of the guardianship of the house of God. And exactly this has been said further down in the verses of Surah Safat, that or as far as the Almighty was concerned, He never asked for Abraham to sacrifice his son. All He asked was to dedicate his son for the cause of the house of God, because you see in the subsequent verses of Surah Safat, the words are Qad saddaqta ru'ya, which means, Abraham, you have made your dream come true. You were not required to actually make your dream come true. You had to interpret the dream. The dream was actually telling you to dedicate your son for the cause of the house of God, for its custodianship. And now what you have done is you have actually embarked upon what the dream is being telling you, and you are actually following the dream in a literal sense. So the literal sense was not actually required. What was required was that you have to dedicate your son for the cause of God, for this house of worship which is being built by a father and a son in Arabia, so that this could become a whole sequence in which a whole generation starts to become custodians of the house of God, and then this custodianship is transmitted in their later generations. So this is how one of the greatest scholars of present times, Imam Hamiduddin Farahi, has interpreted these verses of the Quran. And this is how he has showed that some of the Torah verses or the verses of the ancient scriptures tell us that as far as the symbolism of sacrifice is concerned, this symbolism actually means devoting something, devoting or dedicating the sacrificed entity. And since he was actually being shown that he's sacrificing his son, the purpose was to communicate to Abraham in this way that he should actually dedicate his son for this cause, instead of other causes, or instead of other undertakings or tasks that a son undertakes. What he was being told is that from your progeny, you have to actually dedicate your son for this purpose. And the whole thing could have been communicated to Abraham in words, but it was not. It was communicated to him in the form of a dream, and this dream actually became a test for him. And the Quran says, "Inna haza lahuwal bala'ul mubin." It was a very, very severe test for Abraham, and he actually passed this test in flying colors. He could have interpreted the dream, and he could have acted upon it literally, and he actually took upon himself to act upon it literally, and he actually came out with flying colors as far as the dream was concerned. However, it was not the purpose of the Almighty to have the son slaughtered. So this is how this whole sequence needs to be interpreted. The Almighty never asked or never intended to ask for the sacrifice of a son of a prophet of God. This was never His intention. The intention was shown in the form of a dream. Dreams are always symbolic. This symbolism actually indicated that he has to devote his son for a cause. Instead of interpreting this dream in this way, he could have done so, but he thought that he should go about following it literally, because he thought that it might be might be a second degree interpretation, and the highest degree interpretation for him would have been to do so, to follow the dream literally. And that is why the Quran has actually said that this was a great trial for Abraham, and that it was never required for him to slaughter his son. And the Almighty has actually expressed this in words by saying, "Qad saddaqta ru'ya." Abraham, you have made your dream come true. You have actually acted upon your dream as if you have to slaughter your son. This was never my intention, the Almighty is saying. This was never intended that you to go and slaughter your son. It was like a trial for you, of course, and you have fulfilled your trial in flying colors. So this is how I would communicate to you, my dear viewers, that as far as slaughtering is concerned, as far as the sacrifice of Abraham regarding his son is concerned, it was shown in the form of a dream, and dreams, as you have just indicated, are symbolic in nature. And this symbolism is what is implied here. And hence, we should not be in this misconception, or we should not be misled to think that actually the Almighty wanted that Abraham should spill the blood of his son, his beloved son Ishmael. The Almighty was never as cruel as one can imagine from these, as one can really think that if this is the interpretation, that we have actually made it the way we have come across it. So what these verses are actually saying, I have just tried to summarize before you. And since this is a research which has been presented by one of the premier scholars, and since he has used ancient scriptures also and this Quranic verse in its context, and has also pointed out the relevance of these words, "Qad saddaqta ru'ya," that these words would not have been appropriate if Abraham was not meant to actually take this as literally. He was actually required to interpret it. Otherwise, these words of the Quran that you've made your dream come true would not have been there. They are only appropriate when the Almighty is exclaiming that you're not required to do so. What you were required to do so was a different thing, but you acted upon this in your own passion for following what the truth is. So this is the misconception or the misperception, my dear viewers, that I would like to have cleared for you regarding this great ritual of sacrifice, which is just drawing near in a couple of days, and we commemorate this sterling effort made by Abraham to sacrifice his son, and we commemorate his passion, his huge emotions and sentiments that he had to obey the Almighty. When we do so, when we slaughter this animal, we actually we remember what Abraham did, and we, as I said earlier on in the last sessions as well, that basically animal sacrifice in itself is a symbolism. It is not to be taken per se. It means that today we are sacrificing this animal as a symbol of the fact that tomorrow, if our own life is needed, we will not withhold it. So basically, animal sacrifice in itself on Eid also holds this symbolism, and that symbolism, as I said, is that it's not for the meat of that animal that we sacrifice an animal. It is because of the fact that we pledge our lives to the Almighty, that if tomorrow our life is required, today in a symbolic way we are giving our lives in the form of this animal that we own. Tomorrow, if our own life is required, we will not withhold it. So with this, I come to the end of this session also, and if you have any questions, I'll be very glad to answer them.
Rafiq, I just have unmute your mic and go ahead with your question, please.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad. I have
Right,
some questions. I have been listening to some of Gandhi Saab's clips in a Q&A in UK. Now, I want to know, somebody asked him about gays and lesbians, and I understand, as he said, it's very wrong. But I still have not been able to understand how he would be able to explain how in one family, two sons are gays, and their cousin is gay. And as I said, I've recently discovered a relative of ours is gay. So this is one question of mine. The second question is that Gandhi Saab says in Islam, in the law of inheritance, a man can write in his will, he can give a certain amount to a certain relative or child more than the others who has who's not very well off, or who has done who's looked after his parents, but rightly so, the inheritance law is the assets have to be divided amongst the children. Now, this fact about giving a certain portion to any relative or anybody else, is this stated in the Quran somewhere? Because some scholars disagree with this interpretation of the law of inheritance.
Okay. So as far as your first question is concerned, you see, I have tried to explain this in our earlier sessions as well, that belonging to a certain community, the LGBT community, is a subject of hot discussion in the last couple of years, especially once the US Supreme Court has allowed gay marriages in the United States, and we know that they are allowed in some other European countries as well, whereby they acknowledge this fact that being gay is a sexual orientation which is acceptable, which is in fact not a deviation, and it's something which is perhaps in our genes. And people, if they are gay or they are lesbians or they have these same gender tendencies, then this is because of their inbuilt DNA or their inbuilt chromosomes. Now, it needs to understand that as far as this deviation is concerned, let's put this debate on one side, whether this same gender attraction or same gender behavior is genetically inspired or it is a deviation. Nonetheless, whether it is genetically inspired or if it is a deviation. The fact is that it is not an acceptable behavior. So we have to make this distinction that as far as the origin is concerned, let science and let other people debate about it. But the only thing which will make a difference in that particular research is that if it is genetically inspired or it's genetically compelled compels a person to do so, it can only perhaps earn for him some concession regarding his accountability. But the fact is that if a person is born like this, as I gave this example, that even if we have considered that they are born lesbian or born gays, then just as we do not allow people who are kleptomaniacs or who are compulsive stealers who steal things, who are compulsive thieves, so we don't allow them to go scot-free in the society. We of course treat them. So if it is considered to be a genetically inspired or a genetically compelled behavior, we have to treat them, we have to rehabilitate them. And if it is a perversion or a deviation which is acquired externally, then it is all the more reason that we treat them. So whatever be the case, my contention is that it is not an acceptable behavior, first of all, as far as Islam is concerned, as far as the Quran is concerned. And if at all it is proven that it is genetically compelled, then the only thing that can be given as a concession is that perhaps the accountability of such people will be reduced. It will be in proportion to how much they were genetically compelled or not, because something which is not in the control of a person will give him or her an equal alibi or an equal pretext for that deviation. So this is how I think. But of course, as you can see from the Quran, as far as the nation of the Prophet Lot was concerned, they were actually destroyed from the face of this earth for this very wrongdoing, which clearly tells us that it's not an acceptable behavior. And I can also see that as far as they were concerned, they were pretty much not genetically compelled, because if that was the case, then perhaps this punishment would have been unjust for them. And it clearly tells us that as far as the same gender behavior mentioned in the Quran is concerned regarding the nation of the Prophet Lot, then surely they're the ones who were actually who willfully adopted this. They deviated from the path of the Almighty, the natural path, and they actually adopted this perversion. If I call this as a perversion, they distorted their nature, and as a result of this perversion, they were punished. And as far as if I've answered your first question, right? Okay. It's okay.
That in Concise, he explains most people don't investigate and their beliefs from a critical point of view or consider the arguments of unbelievers, even though they are perfectly capable of it.
I would answer this question by saying that as far as blind faith is concerned, of course, they shall be answered or held accountable by the Almighty. And how this will this go about? I think this will go about by the fact when a person is tested, and that test is that, for example, some interpretation comes across him regarding his own beliefs, and he finds that his own conscience, that his own understanding is totally averse to it. He feels averse to it. He feels abhorrence and distaste for something which has come to his mind. Or maybe, on the other hand, he finds that what he's believing actually, and the other person has come along with a critique of his beliefs, and hence he now thinks that whatever he is believing is not actually very logical or very, very convincing. So in that case, a person must review his stance. So when we say blind faith, it does not mean that you have to review each and everything ab initio, starting from A, B, C, right, as soon as you reach maturity. That's of course impossible, and it's also impractical. What it means is that whenever someone criticizes you, or whenever some question comes to your own mind regarding what you are believing, regarding what you are practicing, then you must entertain that critique in a manner in which either you answer that critique or you change yourself because you think that critique is convincing, because that critique is something that you must change yourself according to. So if they do not do so, then of course they shall be held accountable before the Almighty, because He shall ask them that some critique came along your way and you were convinced of it. Why didn't you change yourself? And He will also ask us that if there was this position that we took, and when our own question that arose in our mind questioned us that we were doing something wrong, our own conscience questioned our behavior, but we never changed or amended our behavior. So this is the time, this is the period in which we have to make a decision. Either we accept a critique and change ourselves, or we have a reply to that critique and continue what we believe in. It cannot be that we are convinced of something else and we are doing something else. This is where we will be surely getting caught in front of the Almighty if we do not actually act seriously in this affair.
I have a question from Bushra Saba, and she's asking about, one second, it's from Facebook, and she's saying, do we have to eat sahur for nafil fast?
Whether it's nafil or as far as eating suhoor is concerned, it's an optional thing. It's not an essential part of the fast. However, of course, it's highly recommended, it's highly desirable that we get up for the fast, because that is the time that we will be able to pray the tahajjud prayer if possible, and then the fajr prayer. Other than that, if we can maintain our own energy without eating suhoor, of course, this is not something of a essential part or a mandatory part of the fast. It's a recommended part, but whether it's the optional fast or the farz fast, I mean, whether the Ramadan fasts are concerned or the optional fast that we keep are concerned, in both of them, eating sehri or eating the suhoor is not essential.
Thanks, sir. Rafi Saba, I can come back to you, and if you don't mind repeating your second question, unless Dr. Sahib, you remember that.
I'd rather that she does repeat the question, please.
The question is that Gandhi Sahib says that in the law of inheritance.
Oh yes, I remember the question now. You just needed to remind me.
Thank you.
So actually, what needs to be understood here is that as far as the law of inheritance is concerned, the Quran clearly says that the law of inheritance has to be implemented after one's will that has been made. So one's legacy or one's will has to be discharged, has to be acted upon, and then the law of inheritance can come into account. Now, as far as the law of inheritance is concerned, it actually describes the shares of the heirs on the basis of their relationship, their familial relationship, their blood relationship with the deceased. And therefore, the Quran says that this is something that human beings were not capable of actually evaluating, that how much a benefit we possess for our relatives. And the Quran says, "La tadruna ayyuhum aqrabu lakum nafa," that you do not know the benefit which a particular relative holds for a deceased person. And hence the Almighty said that in such cases, the law of inheritance will come into play, and the shares which have been named, outlined by the Quran, shall be distributed in exactly the same way. But remember, this is as far as your familial relationship with the deceased is concerned. Now, Ghamidi Sahib has actually pointed out that this is not the only relationship which a person has with the deceased person. It's not just I am a son, and when I'm a son, it's not just that this capacity of being a son is something about which I have no knowledge of, that how much a son would be of benefit, and hence the Quran had to intervene and tell us that this is the benefit of the son and this is the share of the son. Now, there are other areas as well in which a person is affiliated to another person, and that could be, for example, in a position that makes me an economically very, very depressive individual if I've lost the race in economics and finances and I'm lagging behind. So as far as those heirs are concerned who are actually associated with the deceased person in some other form other than that familial relationship in which the principle was of mutual benefit, the Quran has only outlined that mutual benefit as far as that relationship is concerned. It says that as far as other relationships are concerned, for example, as I said, two very prominent examples are that one of your heirs has lost the race of the financial affairs, and he's not a very good earning hand. He's very poor in his finances. And the other thing is that he has served you in a number of ways. So all these and the other ways can also be thought of. These are the ways on the basis of which we can make a will in the favor of an heir, and we would not be actually making that will because we are making that will because he is an heir of ours. No, as I said, as far as an heir is concerned, that will only be considered because once we have that familial relationship in practice. This is an entirely different state of affairs in which we are actually making a will for a person who is our heir, but not on the basis of his relationship with us on family grounds. Not because he is our son, not because I like one son more than the other son, but because of the fact that that son has been of service to me, or he has not been able to stand on his feet and earn for himself. So in that case, if I give something extra to my son, I am not going to make it be because of the fact that he's my favorite. It's not because as a son that I'm favoring him, because the Almighty says that as far as the son is concerned, that particular share will be specified as the one that the Quran has. But if there are other areas through which you have this benefit being transferred, which is of course not the familial benefit, then in that particular area you can give some more money to an heir, but the basis has to be different. I know it's slightly complicated, but you need to understand that as far as giving an heir is concerned, some money beyond what the Quran has said, then that has to be on the basis of something other than familial relationship, of something other than the fact that he is merely my son. And that I said as an example is that, for example, some son has been of much more service to the father, or some daughter has been much more service to the father, or the fact that that particular son or daughter has not been able to earn for himself or herself, or he or she is too young to stand on his or her feet and the parents are too old so that they have to leave something more for that child. So this is how what the Quran has actually said, that then you can make a will in favor of that son by saying that this is the amount that I'm trying to give him because of the fact that he has, for example, served me a lot. And this is separate from the amount which I of that of a daughter. So that is a totally separate and a different affair. As far as a normal relationship is concerned, that is how the Quran is said.
Amount be given to anybody else besides the heirs who has somebody else in the family?
Of course,
relative?
you can. You see, as I say, you can make a will in favor of any person. Making a will in favor of someone is always allowed, and once that will has been discharged, only after that the remaining money will be distributed among the heirs. So we need to understand that as Muslims, all of us must write a will if we want to distribute or donate or give some money to some other people. Then we have to write this will, and once that money has been given from our legacy, from our inheritance, the remaining portion will be distributed among the heirs. So the will has to come into effect first. So if there is someone that we wish to give something, then we must write a will so that that will is first implemented and the remaining portion then goes to the heirs.
Dr. if our time, we just have 1 minute left. If I can, on the same subject, ask you something.
Sure.
I've noticed that a lot of confusion comes out of something. There's a notion that in parents, whatever they own, there is an inherent God-ordained right for a certain portion in parents' wealth for children. Are parents in their, absolute right to not give even a penny to children, and all the law of inheritance has to do, as you mentioned, only with what they leave behind? Do children have some God-ordained right in wealth of parents? As
I said, that this God-ordained right, of course, is the one that has been mentioned by the Quran. When the Quran has mentioned the shares of the wife or the children or the spouses or the parents, that is the God-ordained share. So we are not talking about the God ordained share regarding Rafia Sahiba's question when she was asking that can some more amount be given to the heirs other than the God ordained share. So I was actually answering that if you have to give something more than the God ordained share, then it has to have some other basis. You just cannot favor a child and say that, okay, since I like my elder child more than the younger one, so I'm going to give him more. So that is what the Quran is trying to stop here. It says that these God ordained or the predetermined shares are the ones which the Quran has actually outlined, and they cannot be changed. Other than that, if you still want to give a child something more, then that has to have some different basis. And that basis, as I said, could be, for example, that a child has served some father or mother, or he has been left behind in his life and he's not being able to earn something. It has to be some reason other than that family reason, other than that familial relationship.
Saying is that if there is no special case to make any special provision for anyone, and parents want to divide everything in their life instead of leaving anything behind or leaving a will, they must adhere to this division.
Well, that is a recommended division, but as far as your own life is concerned, I mean, when you're living, there is no rule for that. There is the law of inheritance is a recommendation, or is a rule, is a principle which has to be followed once a person dies. It is a post-death scenario. The pre-death scenario in which a person is living, a parent has the liberty to gift any amount to any child. And of course, the only basis has to be justice, that they should not be unjust in this matter, because God is going to ask them for this injustice. But other than that, as far as the law of inheritance is concerned, it only comes into play, the God ordained shares come into play once a person dies. When he is living, it is entirely up to the parent or the person himself or herself to give whatever amount that he or she thinks to the people who are around him. And this is what we call as gift, or hiba in Arabic. So gift and hiba is something which always occurs in the lifetime of a person, and it can vary from person to person, circumstances to circumstances. But as far as the God ordained shares are concerned, they specifically relate to post-death scenarios.
So if I choose to give out 100% of my wealth in my life to some charity, not leave even a penny for my children, am I violating any?
You're not. You have to have some reason for that. Otherwise, for example, you could have this reason that your children are very well off, or that there's something, maybe they're very disobedient and you don't feel like giving anything to them, and they've really been very, very bad to you. That could be the reason. But if you're trying to, it should not be the case that you are going to deprive your children with some wealth which actually they deserve to be given because they needed this in their own lifetime. You can gift all of your wealth to charity. I say that's perfectly okay. But if that is to be on the expense of the well-being of your children, then that is something that you must think of. Because if you're depriving of your children of something that could actually make them stand up in life, then this is something you might be showing injustice to them. Other than that, for example, if your children are well settled, or there could be other scenarios as well, if you're dispensing with your money the way you would like to, you have this prerogative.
So if they're all okay, there is no issue, they're all financially
Right.
fine, I don't have to still give them something.
You don't.
I can give it to.
Yes, absolutely. So you have this right.
There is a couple more questions, and I took these people's time. I shouldn't have.
No, it's okay.
If it's okay to take 5 extra minutes.
Of course.
Is that okay with
Please
you?
do.
Okay. Tosif Choisab, just if you could unmute your mic. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Just clarification on the pre-death and post-death scenario.
Right.
Just to be clear, I think you kind of answered, but I just wanted to make sure. So even in the pre-death scenario, the will, in someone's will, my will, I can say 100% of whatever is left goes to this charity, or half of my children, and leave out some. Is that acceptable?
No. What I was actually explaining is that in the pre-death scenario, you don't write a will. You actually physically hand over the amount to the people involved, to the charity. Will is something which... So this is you're not authorized.
Okay.
You see, if you're making a will that you're giving some all of your wealth once you die to a particular charity, again you have this right, but you have to bear this in mind that if you are depriving some of your children of this amount and they actually were in need of this, then you could be questioned by the Almighty. Legally, you have this right to make a will in favor of any person, any charity. If you would like that all your wealth should be gifted or should be devoted to any charity, you have this right. This is the legal situation. But in the hereafter, the Almighty can ask you that although you were given this right, did you exercise this right in the correct way? So you see, to have a right is one thing.
Right. So when you say legally, you don't mean Islamic legally.
No, I mean Islamic legally. I do mean Islamic legally. Yeah, I do mean that. I mean that you have this right.
Because Quran says that these are the inheritance laws distribution. You're basically taking a departure from that and giving
No,
it
see
to
what we are doing is
So
the
you will be
Quran.
questioned.
The Quran says another thing.
That is
The Quran says another thing, and it says that first the will has to be discharged, and it says "Min ba'de wasiyatin yusi biha aw dayn," which means that if you have any outstanding debts in your name, first of all they shall be cleared. If you have made a will, then that shall be implemented. Once your debts have been cleared and your will has been implemented, the remaining amount shall be distributed among the heirs. So if the will is such that all the amount is going to be distributed to a charity, that would mean that there is no money left for the heirs. This is something that is your prerogative. You are given this choice, but you have to exercise this choice in a just way, in a prudent way. You see, it's like it's telling you that you have discretion, but every discretion comes with justice. You cannot be foolhardy in exercising a discretion.
that was the difference. I think the sister also kind of asked that same question.
Right.
But some of the scholars say that you should not be doing distribution on your own, going against what.
So
Allah
what
has
what these people say actually is that you should not change the shares of the legal heirs. So we are not talking about legal heirs here. We are talking about a charity. For example, if you're going to give your money after you pass away to a charity, so the legal heirs.
I'm talking about legal heirs also. I'm talking about legal heirs.
Right.
If I say after I die, my legal heirs don't get anything. But just
So the Quran
maybe one of
says,
them or
yes, the Quran says that the only way that you can deprive your legal heirs in this way is if they have been of tremendous harm to you, for example, or you can deprive them of something, because you see the basis of the law of inheritance is the benefit of kinship, the benefit which a relative holds for the deceased. If this benefit does not exist, for example, as we have cases in many countries in which a child ends up killing the father or causing tremendous harm for him, the father has the right to make a will that I am not going to give anything of my inheritance to this child. So that is on the basis of that law. So that's an entirely different thing. But I was actually talking about the fact that if you're going to give in charity, so that is basically an implementation of your own will. Once you implement the will, after that legal heirs come into play.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, I think the confusion comes from those detailed shares that are specified in Quran, that you give one portion to this and
Right.
Third to this.
Right.
Right. So
They are addressed to people who are left behind, how to divide it versus those are the portions that God wants you to, the person
Right.
who's wealth. I think you see what I'm saying.
right, I do understand. Yeah.
Versus giving to, justifiably giving to someone, dividing between.
Right.
Sticking to those portions or not, and is that addressed only to people who are left behind? How to divide your wealth?
So maybe, inshallah, one of the coming sessions we will take up this in more detail. This law of inheritance is something which is of course something we must all make ourselves aware of, because each of one has to die and we have to know these rules. So inshallah, in one of these coming sessions, let us take up all these things and take a comprehensive look at the law.
If that's what we're doing, then I have a question for Rafiq Khaja Sahib, I'm sure, about inheritance, as well as Sayyid Mohsin Sahib. So if they don't mind, we can hold these off till you take it in a little more depth.
Right.
Okay. So the other thing, Dr. Sahib, and all the participants in the class, next weekend we don't have a class because it's right after Eid. And a lot of people have, dinners, Eid dinners, and all that over the weekend. So if that's okay, Dr. Shah, with you, we can cancel next Saturday's class. And shall I continue after that?
Okay, inshallah.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.